Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast. Today, you're going to be hanging out with me, Jocelyn, as I interview someone I truly respect and admire as a mom, a woman, and an expert in her field. Her name is Dr. Morgan Cutlip. Now, if you've been a listener, you know that we don't have guests on our podcast very often. So the reason that we're having her on is because we believe in what she's doing, and in particular, a book that she has written and is coming out that I feel is so important. We know that a lot of our listeners are in the stage of life that we're in. You know, that you have children, whether they're young babies or toddlers, or maybe they're teens, maybe they have even left the nest. But I know that it's been powerful to read and learn and talk amongst people about the experience of becoming a parent and that journey of the identity shifting and evolving, not just the how-tos and how to burp and how to change diapers and breastfeeding. You know, people focus a lot on the activities. But today's interview with Dr. Morgan Cutlip about her book, which is coming out, How to Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself, is truly important. And I just want to celebrate her because as a busy mom, and you know, she actually does part-time homeschooling with her kids. They're in a hybrid program. Her husband is away from the home Monday through Friday for work. And among all of that, she still finds the time to devote herself to creating content and tools and resources and writing an entire book. And I just think she's brilliant, not just because she has her PhD in psychology, but because she has real life wisdom and experience as a mother. So you will not only want to listen to this episode, but support her like I am by pre-ordering her book, How to Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself. Again, she wrote this book amongst everything else she has going on in her world, and you're going to love her in this interview as she shares so authentically, vulnerably, and gives me so many aha moments. And I was lucky enough to read her book before it has even come out, and I immediately had tears in my eyes because she said exactly what I needed to hear. So let's go ahead and dive into this interview. Well, Dr. Morgan Cutlip, thank you so much for being here today with this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
And I truly felt so honored to read your book before it came out. And I just want people to know that this is not just going to be more content thrown at you, learn this, learn that, this strategy, that strategy. Like I started to feel like my eyes were welling up with tears immediately within a few sentences of reading this book because it was literally what my heart and my soul needed to hear and to read. And so just thank you for writing this book. And I can't wait for people to read it.
This is the most humbling compliment. So thank you. I actually today that as we're recording this, I announced that my book was available for pre-order and there are only a handful. I'm talking like 3 or 4 people besides my mom and my husband and my
No.
dad who have read this book. And so it's like, you're like, oh, I hope people like it, and there's so much of me in it as well as my professional experience. And so I just cannot tell you how meaningful it is for me to hear that from you. So thank you
Mm.
for taking the time to actually read it. I
Well, I'm going
really
to be
appreciate
hyping
it.
this. I'm going to hype this book up, not only on this podcast, but online because, I mean, you know, in our work, we just know that people who are parents of our listeners and our audience, like not only is there the work they're doing within their marriage, but then there's the work, you know, within their parenting experience and who am I and my identity. And so there's a lot of ground we're going to cover with some questions I have about the content that you put in this book, which I'm like blown away at how much is in here. But I want people to just connect with you on like a personal woman to woman note of like how you're feeling in this kind of moment because it's summer break with the kids and you've got a book launch coming up. You serve your online community. You're an amazing wife. And so I just want to even know how you're doing as a human being right now.
I think that's such a lovely question to start with because I'm just like, okay, Morgan, do not go too deep into this. We'll spend 30 minutes just talking about our lives and what's going on. So I appreciate the question. Total transparency, I'm anxious a little bit right now. I think, you know, I've actually not been somebody who's had a lot of anxiety in my life. I was shocked at when our daughter was first born. It's was like I had postpartum anxiety. It bubbled up in such a big way, but now it shows up sometimes, and so I'm feeling that. A little bit of context about my life: my husband travels a lot for work, and so I'm not a single mother, but I like there are these moments of life where I do a whole lot of single parenting. So he left Monday. He'll get home Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon is our daughter's 10th birthday party. So I'll be prepping and doing all the things to get ready. And he's just like rolling in for the party.
Mm,
And they have our daughter and son have a play that morning. So I have to go to that as well. Which is cutting it real close to get back in time for our guests to arrive. So I've got that going on. Um, I I really, summer is wild. This summer, especially in launching the book, is kind of wild because I'm really trying to honor my priorities, which one of them is being with the kids a lot. So I work 2 days a week, and that's it. And the rest of the time, I'm with the kids, and so it's like this regular practice of managing the reality that I'm not always going to get my to-do list done
mhm.
and just living with unfinished business a lot. And, it's just kind of like ties into something with the book that I talk about, which is like life is going to continually mess this up. It's going to create these imbalances and disconnections. And so I'm just like living what I talk
Yeah.
about in some major ways of just being comfortable, being out of whack a little bit this summer.
Well, it's so amazing that you just are authentic and you're genuine and you don't have like this content out there like I've got it all figured out and my circumstances are perfect. Like to even know that wow, you're doing, Monday through Friday at home solo. So just a quick note and then we'll get into some questions about the book. How do you then handle the anxiety that you're feeling?
It's like a lot of things. I mean, part of it is, you know, what do I need right now? I think it's a question I'm regularly, checking in with myself and kind of doing a scan of what I need. Like, for example, as I'm sitting here, I rushed into meetings this morning and I didn't exercise or do anything to move my body. So I'm like, it's like on my list for today, or like, I got to work out some of my anxiety. I think, um, I'm a big believer, and this is just, I guess, called insight, right? We just keep repackaging these concepts and
Mhm.
calling them different things. But the idea that when stuff is invisible and swirling around in our brains, but we haven't actually defined it, I think a lot of overwhelm and anxiety comes from that of like, I have a lot to do, but it's, or a lot going on, but we're not really, I don't know, there's no like label for it or definition for it. I think that can drain our energy and create a lot of overwhelm. So I'm doing a lot of like organizing my chaos
Yep.
and making it manageable, in the form of lists and reprioritizing regularly, and focusing on the stuff that is most important to me. And when I do that, I can rest assured that I'm spending my time wisely.
I love it because literally to my left, I'm actually right handed, but it just happens to be on my left side, is my notebook where I daily write out my list and I love checking it off because exactly that. Like I feel this overwhelm, can feel like the feelings of anxiousness when it is just stuff floating around in my head. So I think that's even just a good reminder for everyone listening that the power of just writing it out, organizing it, prioritizing it. So that's amazing. And I'm glad you shared that just personal circumstance because as people listen to when we talk about this book, again, this isn't someone who has like a ton of help and they're perfect situation all the time. It's like you have circumstances that you're working with. So this book, which everyone heard in the introduction, but to say it again, is Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself. And you address even on the cover, things like guilt and burnout. So I think let's dive into the first official content question from your book. And I loved that you right away jumped into the idea of how balance is baloney, because I think we all continue to seek for that, whether the listener works or doesn't work. It doesn't really even matter. I think that we all still try to seek balance, whether it has to be balance with our fitness, our marriage. Are we getting enough quality time, alone time? How are the kids doing? Do they have, and it's just this pursuit of balance. And so from your book, if we don't seek balance, why is that baloney and what should we seek for instead?
Yeah, I think I had to start there because seeking balance has become this sort of cliche statement, right? Like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, busy. That's everybody's answer because we're all really busy, just trying to find a better balance. And it's true. It's in all domains of life that it seems like we're after, we're in the pursuit of balance. And I think what the problem is that, and why it's baloney, why we need to call it out as baloney, is that when we finally hit balance, because we will at some point, we'll have like a moment in time, whether it's our marriage, our relationship with our kids, with ourselves, with work life and family life, all the things we're pursuing balance in. We'll hit it for a moment and then it'll all fall apart again. And I think when we believe that this final destination place called balance is achievable, we are regularly feeling like we're falling short when things get messed up.
Mm.
And so it just sets us up for the most unrealistic expectation. And it's so it needs to be set up front. That's why I start the book that way, of talking about how, what we really need to get good at is balancing, because life, you can say it like really generally, like life, it messes us up. It pulls our relationships apart. Um, even the good stuff, like definitely the good stuff. Like I talked about, our daughter's birthday party coming up. Like it's messing my life up. Like it's messing up my balance. I have more to do. I have more things going on. And so instead of seeking balance, we have to get good at balancing, because life is regularly going to mess us up. And I think that um it can be kind of disheartening, but it can also be very relieving. And it puts you in the driver's seat in all of your relationships. If life is going to mess them up, then we know that it's normal. We don't need to get all bent out of shape about it. And then we also know that there's things we can do about it.
I think that's so key. And I love not only from getting to read your book ahead of time, but also from just watching your content for so long. Like you just, I think, are really masterful around like your mindset and reframing and how you choose to perceive things, which I want listeners to really take away throughout today's episode. But I love that you talked about how it's baloney, because even when there is a moment of excitement, yesterday it was my birthday. And so
Oh,
I
happy birthday!
Thank you. But I arranged with my husband, like he was all in on this, and I went and had like breakfast and went shopping with girlfriends, and like I loved it for a few hours. And then I started to feel so anxious, like
Mhm.
I should be back with my daughter and I should be back. And I should be working on top of this too. Oh, and I didn't work out this morning. And like it's like I only let myself have a little bit of time of feeling like, all right, life's working out pretty good right now. This feels good, before I was focusing on these other places that I quote unquote wasn't, doing enough. And that is new for me as a parent, right? I'm
Yeah.
18 months into this. So I know some of you listeners have been doing this even for years beyond me, but you talked about three core conflicts that moms face in
Mhm.
here. Number one, the sacrifice of our identity. So there's my needs versus their needs. I mean, that comes up so much.
Mhm.
There's the idealization of motherhood, my ideals versus my reality. I mean, how many of us like think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have this amazing newborn experience and I'm gonna look so cute. And then there's the reality of what it looks like. And then the intensity of your parenting standards.
Mhm.
And I want to hit on a bit of this. And so, since you have 10 more years in this than I do, like, I guess, what have you done regarding the identity, the idealization, the standards? Like, walk me through some of your own experience with this that led to writing this book on it.
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is a big question. Okay. First of all, I want to say that experience that you had yesterday, ooh, is so real, of leaving. And it's funny how it doesn't happen until after kids. It's like maybe you would have felt like you should have been doing some work previously before you had kids, but you would not have felt this intense experience in the same way. Um, it's so real. I'm glad you shared that. I think a lot of moms will relate. And I feel like so what you're talking about with that sort of guilt, that's kind of a guilt piece, but all of this stuff really integrates. So I hope, like I'm hoping throughout the book, these pieces start kind of like weaving together. to make sense because nothing is really disconnected from the other things. So I'd say what you're experiencing is guilt, but then it's also like taps into these different conflicts. So how did I navigate these? That's so big. Okay. Everything that I share in the book is stuff that I struggled with myself. This is not a memoir of a book by any stretch of the imagination, but I do share a lot of personal stories and give examples of what the concepts are through my own relationship with my kids and with myself. So I struggled with a lot of these same things, and um, what I did was what's in the book. Part of it was like my needs versus the needs of everyone else is I think a conflict that is like that it's like as tale as old as time, right? That women are raised, we absorb from society, from culture, from systems that we live in, this sort of mentality that we must self-sacrifice to preserve the health and well-being of our relationships.
Mm.
And this is a heavy one. I think this is a big one to really challenge in our own lives in order for us to be able to like even step out and to, enjoy a birthday celebration with friends, to even care for ourselves in the ways that we really, really need to, is that we have to almost rewrite some of the narratives that we've absorbed. And, I think it's a wonderful thing how women especially are the caretakers in relationships that like I'm happy to play that role. I love that. I get to do that in our family. But what happens is a lot of times is that we exist making our needs so small for so long that we
Mm.
start to forget what we need. We start to not even know what we need anymore. Like this experience too. I don't know if you've had this one yet, but where you actually do get a little time to yourself and then you're like,
Yes.
I don't even know what to do with it. Do I
Hmm.
clean? Do I rest? Do I read something? Do I get some work done? I don't know what to do. So part of it is this imbalance existing for way too long. So in my own life, for that one in particular, I did I did a lot of self-reflection. Where did my and I walk people through this in the book. Where do my messaging come from about needs? What have I absorbed? What am I sort of holding on to that's getting in the way of me feeling like I'm allowed to take up, you know, some like space and time in our family relationship and challenging them and rewriting these narratives. And I remember like a very specific conversation with my husband where I told him, I was like, listen, this is how I start every serious conversation, if you know me. Listen, uh, I'm going to start asking for what I need more. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And sometimes I'm going to be maybe really assertive. And other times I'll be like, maybe not assertive enough, but like, heads up, it's coming. And
Mm.
so I want you to like recognize that's what I'm trying to do and know that's not easy for me. And it was a practice. I think probably I had to reach a really like low point of feeling really not unhappy in being a mom. I would never say I've been unhappy being a mom, but unhappiness with my own experience in motherhood. Like this
Mm.
isn't what I thought it would be. I had to hit that point to actually prompt me to really make some of these changes, and it's been such a game changer for me.
When, just out of curiosity, when was that point that you like realized that and realized you needed to make a change in the way you were handling or thinking about things?
It was when so Effie is our daughter. She's 10 years old, and Roy next week she's 10, and then Roy is 7. And I'd say it was when Roy was 2 or 3. Like it took me a while. It was actually part of it was is I was just at my wit's end, and I had said to my husband, and a lot of what I did is like I protected him
Mm.
from being too involved, and a part of it also is like how my motherhood journey began, which I can share that if you want, um, but I was like at my wit's end, and I had said, that's it. Like I need a break. Like take the kids out. Like I just can't. Like I'm suffocating. I feel like there's like an elephant on my chest, and he took them to the pool. I actually shared about this on Instagram once. I should have probably talked to him about it first.
Mm.
The story was more about me, but he was like, that didn't make me look so good. But
Mm.
it's partly my responsibility as well, but he took the kids to the pool and I showed up a couple hours later and he like hadn't packed anything for them. Like no, and he's a like I have a great husband who's really really good about being involved in the house and with the kids, but he was gone a lot
Mhm.
and I didn't make a lot of space for him because I was like I part of this is my motherhood like my template of what a good mom is
Mhm.
that a good mom does everything for everyone. That's what I had, and she was definitely burnt out many times in motherhood. I remember it distinctly, but this was a good mom does everything for everyone. A good mom doesn't need to ask for help. A good mom puts her needs last. These are a lot of the things operating in my mind, and so yeah, I would show up at the pool, and he's like, the kids are freaking out because they don't have snacks and towels or dry clothes. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Why have I created these, you know, and obviously he participated, but like, why have I created this environment for me as a mom where like I'm the only one who does everything? I'm the only
Mm.
one who knows the stuff and my needs have become invisible. And so it was like, that was the rock bottom moment for me.
Yeah, I mean, a huge realization. Like, we have those moments, and I think that we either can choose to go down this disempowered path or say, okay, what is this showing me? What new clarity am I getting from this kind of breakdown moment? And obviously, that's what you've chosen to do, and a lot of what you inspire people to do in their work. So, kind of like a question, too, because you like, it's amazing when people really hear about your whole background and even like you have been in the relationship space a long time, even your dad has
Mhm.
been. And so you have a really great kind of scope of understanding both the motherhood journey but also like the marriage journey and
Yeah.
relationship dynamics. So, I guess a question that will even be great for listeners to know when thinking about this book is do you find in your maybe your own life, your research, as well as your content with couples, I mean, no, women even, you talk to so many women, couples, everybody, do you feel as though there's got to be one that gives? Meaning, okay, it used to be that I could really take care of myself. Then I've got now a partner, right? We get married and okay, now I've got someone else to be considering and helping take care of them and think about them. So maybe at times I have to compromise or maybe make sacrifices. Then there's now another baby. And so it's like this depletion of us. And
Mhm.
so I guess I would love if you'd speak to that. Like, and we work with couples. And so we hear sometimes, actually a lot of time, is we've got one, two, maybe three kids now. And it's like the marriage went last. So
Yeah.
yeah, would you just even speak to like, does something have to lose out?
Mm. That's such a good question. Oh, and I love what you guys have been putting out lately. Your reels are so good.
Oh.
Yeah, I think what happens is I mean this kind of goes back to our conversation about balancing versus finding a balance. I mean, I think what we see happening is like first the mom goes, then the relationship goes, or maybe they kind of fade out together a lot of times when kids come into the picture.
Mhm.
Um, and it's got this like it's such a interconnected dynamic, which I know that you know. Whereas, like, the mom starts to go, she starts to get resentful, and then it plays out in the tone of the relationship, and that dynamic starts to sour. So there's all sorts of ways this can develop that create problematic patterns, really that if people don't stay on top of, become really entrenched and hard to get out of, and really hard to trace the origin of. Um, so I this is why it's like this point. I don't want to keep saying the same thing, but this point about balancing becomes so important. So if we can normalize that our relationships are going to get messed up, and like I said, kids coming into the picture, even good things will mess them up. Kids coming into the picture is such the perfect example of that. If we can normalize that, it really helps a lot of things in our relationships because one of the biggest things I see is that usually the woman is the relationship manager.
Mm.
And like, we need to talk, we need a date. Are you okay? What's going like the one who's kind of doing all of this type of stuff. Um, and so it's one more thing that she's carrying. But what happens is that she'll initiate, let's say, a discussion about the relationship. And a lot of times it's when things aren't going well. And so it creates the dynamic where it's like the only time we talk about our relationship is when we're in trouble or you're mad at me. And
Mm.
so the other partner wants to avoid that conversation at all costs. So it doesn't usually end up going well, and we have the defensiveness and all the things that happen that create a lot of problems. And so if we can normalize, listen, relationships get out of whack, they get out of
Mhm.
balance. That's normal. So, what does that mean? That means they're not going to autocorrect. If we just like sit on our disconnections, they don't get better spontaneously. If we can agree to that, then we can also agree that we have to be the ones who manage our relationships. And so, whether that's in a couple relationship, like there has to be like this normalization that we talk about things and we repair, and we have like meetings, we discuss this stuff. Same with our relationship with our kids, same with our relationship with ourselves. And so this is a very long way of answering your question, which is saying the way that like everybody sort of thrives, or at least stays mostly whole, is that we normalize we're going to get out of whack, and we continually practice checking in with one another. I give the system for check ins in my book, checking in with one another and paying attention to our relationship bonds, which I give a model for that in the book too. And we repair regularly. Where do we need a little fine tuning? We're going to tweak the dials a little bit, in our relationship with our partner. Where do we need a little fine tuning in our relationship with ourselves? We're going to tweak the dials. So it's this, we do it already in some ways. Usually one partner does it more than another, but the framework in the book helps you do it in a targeted way. So you're not just like wasting your energy or confused, but it gives you a framework and a definition of how do we do this balancing thing in a way that's going to be effective and efficient so we don't get lost. The same concept applies to relationship with your kids and your relationship with your partner. Hopefully
Yes,
that made sense. It's a long, long answer.
well, no, I mean, again, I think it's great that you reiterate this idea of balancing, which I think is really like the golden thread throughout your whole book and all the sections is like, it's an active participation. There's no arrival. There's no
Yes.
place you arrive to. And then you're like, oh, I figured it out. It's like a daily, sometimes I feel like sometimes I have 3 days in one day. And so I've
Yes.
had to regroup and like recalibrate a few times. And that's, I think, hopefully refreshing for people listening is that it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean you don't have the right system or the perfect thing. It's like, it's just embracing that there's going to be this balancing experience in life. And I love that you talk about so much in the book, this idea of like these impossible standards that
Mm.
we put out there. And how do you think that affects people? Like, how does it affect whether it's the people that you talk to, the women, your audience, yourself? Like, tell me more about these impossible standards, how it shows up for us, how it affects us.
Yeah. So impossible standards, I define as just like normal types of expectations we put on ourselves, but they're taken to the extreme. So they become these standards that are absolutely like unrealistic and impossible to meet. And the way that it affects us is this is usually like what sucks the joy out of motherhood. So when you went, out with your friends yesterday for your birthday, there's probably under the surface some impossible standards at play there for you. When we feel guilt, it's usually impossible standards are the culprit of what's going on, and um, it's what really just like sours our experience. It's like when we're out with our kids and we're just doing something like really mundane, and we're like, ugh, I should be doing something more stimulating with them, or I should be having more fun, or I should be doing this. These are these impossible standards at play, and they kind of like ruin the in the moment experience in some pretty big ways.
You're so right. I mean, it really does take us out of the present moment. And I mean, yeah, I feel like that is something I have to reframe a lot of times
Yeah.
is, oh, is this enough for Sky? Like, oh, wait, should I be making her a sensory bucket? Like I literally am like, and then you'll see something
Oh,
online and you see someone's post and they like have this elaborate thing they set up and you're like, I should have done that. And then
yeah.
you even see like reels where it's like, you see content about like you shouldn't work at all as a mom, like you should be 100%, and like so there's even people kind of like projecting guilt onto you for,
Yeah.
as I run my business with my husband, and I mean it's just these impossible standards that we can even feel are imposed on us by content, by other people,
Oh
by
my
our
gosh.
parents. And so for you, is it just that you recognize these thoughts within yourself, and is it just like self-talk and reframing that you work through?
A little bit. Well, I just want to what you're saying. I mean, there's different sources for these impossible standards, like how they develop comes from different areas. But one of them is what you're talking about, is how we consume information. And like, I just want to, I mean, this is nothing new when we're like, oh yeah, social media has made stuff really hard. It's true. It's a blessing and it's a curse. Like there is like, look what you guys put out on social media. I've put out, what colleagues put out, just wonderful, accessible, free advice. It's
Mhm.
such a blessing, but there is a dark side to it, which is exactly what you're talking about, like how it informs all of the shoulds that develop in our, especially like our parenting journey. I think so many shoulds. I mean, who do we really all have Montessori playrooms set up? Like I don't think so. I remember like there's times where I felt like early on paralyzed in how I respond to I mean, I've got a doctorate in psychology. I'm sitting there like, ooh, how do I word this perfectly so we don't
Mhm.
mess up our child? So I think, it's so important for moms and for parents to pay attention to how they feel when they consume some of this information, because when you start noticing you walk away feeling terrible, it's time to take a minute, because
Oh, I
it's
got excited about
and
something you just said, if I can jump in,
yeah.
because
Yeah, yeah.
you just reminded me of something I've been noticing. So as Sky is entering the toddler-ish stage,
Yeah.
I notice more of these thoughts of, especially because I'm receiving therapy, specifically EMDR therapy, to work through some stuff I've been through, healing more times, like I feel like multiple times, of things with my mom or friends, like just these things that I noticed resurface since having my baby girl. And what I'm getting at is, because I'm aware of like trauma, I'm like, quote unquote trauma informed, and I am aware of like personal development and self development and some psychology. I start to feel worried of, how is this affecting her? How is
Yeah.
this impacting? Oh my gosh, like will I give her trauma and mess her up? And again, like this is starting already and she's 18 months. She doesn't even have complete, cognitive understanding of everything, but I'm already holding myself to some standard of making sure it's a completely non-toxic environment. And so you
Yeah.
talk about that in the third core conflict around
Yeah.
the intensity of parenting standards. And you even say it like, my kids will be screwed up by my parenting missteps. And I know that all of my friends who are into self development as well, like, we can worry that we're like creating the problems in their life. So speak to that a little bit.
Oh my gosh, it's so relatable. I mean, yeah, and I think like it's people in our community who are in this field, but I think it's because of social media, it's extended out. Like I don't know if you've seen the posts about like don't praise your children too
Mm-hmm.
much, or
Yep.
like there was another one about developing, oh, don't tell them how you feel, you feel sometimes when they do stuff, because you're going to develop codependency in them. I just shut the phone down at that point. I'm like, oh, this is too much. And it's all well intentioned. I believe it's all well intentioned, but um we we are parenting at a time where we're like, cycle breakers and all these things, which are so wonderful, but it's going so extreme that I think it's really creating a lot of stress and anxiety in parenting. So the third conflict I talk about is the intensity of our parenting standards. So maybe I did change this in the updated version, but it's my parenting must be perfect versus my parenting is good enough. And it's funny, I had a stat in there from a baby center study that said 80% of moms said it was important to them to be the perfect mother. And they wanted me to recheck that stat. And it's actually, in a more recent study, gone up to 83%.
Mm.
And I think that's wild, because if you asked a mom on the street, she'd be like, of course, I'm not trying to be perfect. But I do think that we are I don't know, subconsciously or unconsciously, or maybe even kind of consciously, we're holding ourselves to standards of near perfection. Like, how can you leave childhood without experiencing something? I just think like that is an impossible standard to have a child who leaves childhood being completely actualized. And I will tell you why this is why they cannot.
Please do.
Please, yeah, because this is so important. The reason why every kid is going to leave childhood with something is because there's a difference between interpretation and intention.
Yes.
So we have really good intentions as parents. We are like crushing it at parenting our generation. We are doing such a good job. We care so much about being good parents. And so we have the best of intentions. However, our child is going to interpret our words, our actions, our inactions, all of the things through their own lens. And like we have no control over that.
I know. Oh,
And
that is
it's,
such a
it's
good
hard, right? But hopefully it's a relief.
It's such a good point, right? Because there's so many studies, even just where there's like two people in the same environment and the same things happen to them, but one goes down this path and the other goes down this path. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, there is so much to say about the mystery of how is someone going to perceive, what meaning are they going to create from certain events. And so I hope everyone can hear that as some relief. And that gives me some relief of just like, I could do it perfect and she'd even have a story about me being perfect. Like,
Yes. Well, then they say, like, don't be too perfect. Actually,
right.
as one of my pre-order incentives, I do some private podcast interviews.
Mm.
And one of them is about the cost of perfect parenting because being too perfect has some cost to it. And so not to give more anxiety.
No, we can't win. And I think that's what I love about just the overall theme from your book is just that it's about understanding kind of these programs or these things that could be affecting us that are giving anxiety to us or contributing to our experience of motherhood and just being aware of them and then being able to go, okay, like what's a better, more upgraded like perspective here that will allow me to like just be at peace with my
Yes.
life. And you talk about being a good enough mom. I love we won't go into this specifically, but just to for listeners to know, you even go into like what intensive parenting is and even how because I always heard about like conscious parenting, gentle
Yes.
parenting, right? Like all of these things, but even this concept of intensive parenting, we don't have to spend a lot of time on that,
Well,
but
I
just
don't
so
mind sharing because
listeners, yeah.
I think that one is when I came across that research, I was like, bingo. Like
Mm,
this is what we live through right now. So I'll be really quick. So Sharon Hayes is a researcher who coined the term intensive mothering. Um, and it's been researched a bunch, and there's 5 components. So, like 5 pieces make up the whole of intensive mothering. So, it's essentialism, the belief that mothers are the most important or essential parent. This is a belief that leads to like a lot of resistance and like asking for help
mm,
and getting, childcare or even involving our partners. It leads to a lot of maternal gatekeeping. The other is fulfillment, that parents should be fulfilled by their children.
mm,
Like, oh, yay, like this is the pinnacle of life. And um, that can be really disheartening when you're struggling in it. The third is stimulation. We have to provide a consistently stimulating intellectual environment for our kids.
mhm,
Child centered, our lives should revolve around our kids, which I think is, you probably see a lot of this with couples. Like, it's a big detriment to the actual couple relationship when we have that belief. And then the last is challenging, which is the belief that parenting is really hard and draining. And the main takeaway that I think could be helpful for your listeners is that when they researched intensive mothering, they kind of pieced out, like pulled out some of these variables. And so, in general, this is the bad news. They found that in early motherhood, things change over time, but that motherhood was related to increased depression, anxiety, and lower life satisfaction.
mhm,
But when they dug deeper into the research, what they found was it wasn't actually motherhood having a direct relationship with these negative outcomes. It was when you are a mother and you subscribe to these 5 beliefs around essentialism, fulfillment, stimulation, child centered, and challenging, you're going to experience these negative outcomes, or you have a higher likelihood, I should say, to be specific, higher likelihood of experiencing these negative outcomes. And so when we change our relationship with these beliefs, we can change our experience in motherhood.
That is amazing. And I think maybe a couple questions around this of because our listeners, they come to us for, couples content and, how this and that affects my marriage. So here you are as this mom who's realizing, okay, I have this to reframe and I have that. And here's one of the things. How much of it do you feel is our own individual work to kind of work through versus like talking to our partner about it, or how much they should help with it and make us feel better? Because that's, I think, where people wonder, like, okay, how much of this is on me to think through and like work on, and I'm feeling anxious, versus how much should my partner be involved? So, anything you would say to that?
Yeah, I think this is always a really tricky one. So, my book is written for moms. So, it's written for how do you navigate your relationship with yourself is like essentially the concept of the book. And so, does get tricky because, and I actually recently shared about this too, because our experience in motherhood will be related to our relationship. If we have a really difficult and contentious relationship with our partner, it will be dramatically affected. However, there is a whole lot in motherhood that we can control ourselves. So things like how we really stay in touch with ourselves and know ourselves. I think a lot of moms feel like, I used to be fun and now I'm not fun anymore. I don't even know who I am, right? Like this experience of like being incongruent,
Mm-hmm.
um, how we see ourselves and develop our self concept. Do we see ourselves in a good light or not? How we get to know and become comfortable asserting our needs is a big one. And I think that's the one where partners can be really impactful, especially
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes we need others to help us meet our needs. So I guess I'll just say, well, one, I'm going to have another book about the mental load, and that one's more
Nice.
about partnerships. But in this book, it's really for the mom. It's really empowering her to make changes in how she relates to herself, and no relationship is occurring in isolation. So as she changes how she relates to herself, as she changes how she speaks up and asserts her needs, it's going to shift that dynamic in the relationship. And um there may be some I might shift it in a good way, I might shift it in a way that brings up some challenges. um and there are other resources for that, but I think that's like the hope here is that, as we start to change, our relationships really can change in some beautiful and some meaningful ways. I know I've shared before about how I put myself in this experiment where I like took nothing personal for 30 days in my relationships,
Mm.
and nobody changed except for me. And I like experienced profound change in
Wow.
my relationship. So I just want to highlight that piece of like we can do things on our own that shift our relationship and partnership in meaningful ways. And then I'll also say, in the chapter on asserting our needs, I do give scripts to help people assert them in their relationships, because I think that's a piece that can be really hard for some people.
Yeah, I love it. And I really am glad that you underlined the fact that this book is about moms to like moms' connection with themselves. And
Mhm.
that, yes, you give these tools for them and their relationship, whether that be with their partner or with their kids, but it really being kind of like coming home to us
Yeah.
and like really knowing what is robbing us from the joy and like these narratives, these standards, the ideals and versus the reality. And so like what is keeping us from being able to just be present in our lives and as peaceful as possible, even with the roller coaster ride along the way. And I just can't reiterate enough how much just everyone get this book. Like moms, I again teared up within a few sentences of reading it because it was like, okay, I'm not the only one. And wow, this is exactly what I needed to hear and have perspective on. And so it's like your best friend talking to you is what it feels like when you're reading it.
Thank you. You're just making me feel so good. I'm like, oh, I get like uncomfortable at how nice you're being. So I really, really appreciate it. When I was working on the draft of it, I remember talking to my agent who's like amazing. And I told her, I go, I want the book to feel like you're having coffee with a good friend, but like she's credentialed.
Right.
So
And
if
that's
that
exactly what it feels like.
good, okay, then perfect. I did my job.
You did, you did. And it's like you again, you have a PhD in psychology. You have that, but you also are just this real person doing it, and that has your ups and your downs, and you share so authentically. And there's a lot of stories that I really want people to read. So where can people go pre-order this? Because
Mhm.
we all want to support you, so we want to pre-order it and make sure that your launch is as successful as possible.
Thank you so much for your support. So, the best place would be, I mean, you can buy it anywhere that books are sold, but if you go to my website, drmorgancutlip.com, and then /book, or if you just go to my homepage, you'll see a link really easily. If you can find a link to all the retailers there, and then also you can find the spot where you can put in your information after you've pre-ordered, and I have a bunch of gifts when you pre-order, and so that's probably the best place to do it through. I have a sample audio of the first 3 chapters, which is only available when you pre-order. I
Mm.
have private podcast stream with some experts talking about things like the cost of perfect parenting and this experience of like the tired all the time mom.
Mm.
Talk with an OT about some strategies for dealing with that, and lots more. I have more that are coming. Also have like a downloadable companion guide that's coming soon. It's like a hodgepodge. Like I have like dinner ideas because I think that moms just need a break sometimes. I know dads cook too, but coming up with like what to cook. It's got discussion questions, mantras and verses in there
Well,
for
you're giving a lot of
inspiration.
gifts. Maybe
I'm
you
giving
have
a lot away. I
maybe
won't
you
say any
have
more
too
about
high of standards for your book launch for yourself of what
I'm
you should
just
give.
like I just am very excited about this book, and I know I I just think it will help moms, and I really like I needed it so badly when I was first a
Mm.
mom, and so I'm just like whatever it takes to get it in your hands, I'm willing to do it. So,
Yes,
yes, you can do all that on
absolutely.
my website.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and we will have the link in the show notes, but everyone get the book. It is titled Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself: 5 Steps to Banish Guilt and Beat Burnout When You Already Have Too Much to Do. Again, her URL is Dr. Morgan Cutlip, and follow her on Instagram. She's an amazing person to be connected to. Get her book. Let's support this mama who works 2 days a week, doesn't have her partner in the same home all week. Like, let's support Dr. Morgan Cutlip by getting this book ahead of time. And just truly want to thank you for your time, knowing that it's a day where you have a lot going on. You've got the birthday party coming up, and there's a lot you could have done. So I'm going to make sure that this podcast episode gets out there. People hear it, people order your book. And I just so appreciate who you are in the world.
Thank you so much. This just means the world to me, and it's just been so lovely to finally chat with you like this. So thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I will let you get to your day of birthday party planning and everything. And thanks again, and talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Hey, Jocelyn here. Truly hope that you enjoyed this interview and that it gave you some perspective, something new to focus on as a parent, as a mother, just as much as it has for me. Again, you can pre-order her book, but it's actually coming out within just a few days of hearing this episode. So you can go to your preferred online retailer to get that. It's also going to be linked in the show notes, because on her website, you can actually claim some incredible bonuses. And again, she always provides value. So go to the link in our show notes to get directed to her website to find all the retailers for her book and claim those bonuses. But we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you're a new listener, make sure you hit subscribe and also give us 5 stars if you're enjoying our content so far. With that, we will talk to you on the next episode.